One. Uh, Now, good afternoon to everyone from sunny Rockville, Maryland. I want to thank you all for attending the ACRL Access Services Interest Group's Fall Forum. For those of you unfamiliar, the ASIG's charge is to provide a broad framework for discussing topics and exploring areas of development in the field of access services, including but not limited to circulation, information services, reserves, resource sharing, stacks maintenance, student worker supervision, leadership management, remote storage, and security. Through this work, we strive to provide a national stage for library workers in access services and enhance the overall development of access services conversations and programs within ACRL. Our group is currently headed by 3 pairs of co-conveners who each serve staggered 3-year terms as incoming, current, and past officials. This year's past co-conveners are Leslie Brown of Montgomery College and H.J. Pedelti of the University of Iowa. This year's current co-conveners are Tori Liegi of Lycoming College and Lorelei Sterling of the University of Alaska Anchorage. And this year's incoming co-conveners are Jeff Hipsher of Florida State University, and I'm Andrew Yeager of the University of Maryland University's at Shady Grove campus. This year's Fall Forum is devoted to fostering discussion and seeking your input on how we should look to build upon the existing framework for access services librarianship, to incorporate new ideas, competencies, viewpoints, and realities that have grown in prominence since the first version was approved by the ACRL Board of Directors in early 2020. We appreciate all of you making time to review the framework and participate in this discussion, which will help guide our group's next steps toward further development of a meaningful and useful tool for library employees in access services. We'll be providing a set of guiding questions to help instigate conversation, but please feel free to ask your own questions of the group or share your own unique perspective of the framework and its impact on your experience as an information professional. Before we get started, Jeff will share some basic guidelines we think will help ensure a positive and productive discussion, so I'm going to hand it off to Jeff.
Hey everyone, thanks again for coming today to the forum. Again, my name is Jeff Hipsher, and as Andrew said, I'm the head of access services and delivery at Florida State University in Tallahassee. I'll be taking lead for facilitating today's discussion, and we'd ask that all participants help make sure it's a productive conversation by following a few simple guidelines. Please keep your mic muted until you're called on to share. To ask questions verbally, use the raised hand feature in Zoom, and we'll call on participants accordingly. In order to ensure equal space for all participants, we kindly ask all speakers keep their shares to under 2 minutes. Please feel free to type questions in the chat, and the moderators will be sure they are read aloud. And if you'd like to ask a question or share your ideas anonymously, message H or Leslie privately here in Zoom, and they'll read your statement aloud on your behalf. Please try to be respectful of all participants. Treat other participants' reflections and questions with respect. Acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on this particular topic. Speak and let others speak. Share responsibility for including all voices in the discussion. If you have a tendency to dominate discussions, that's me. Take a step back and help the group invite others to speak. If you tend to stay quiet, challenge yourself to share ideas so others can learn from you. And keep comments on topic. And assume positive intent. We are here to ask genuine, curious questions and provide responses that will help move the libraries forward towards constructive outcomes. So when thinking on this framework and potential revisions, the ACIG group found ourselves returning again and again to a handful of central questions about this document, our experiences as information professionals, and the future of access services librarianship. And so for today's forum, we'd like to share those questions in hopes that they instigate today's discussion. Training. What information is crucial for access services professionals when considering this document as training for new folks? Recruitment. How can this document become more inclusive, accessible, and approachable to those without a background in library science or the specific field of access services? Advocacy. What do we want university administrators, library leadership, and national professional associations to know about access services information professionals and the labor we perform in these departments? And the craft of librarianship. What do we want our peers and colleagues to better understand about this work and its larger institutional contributions? And with that, we're going to go right into the discussion. So please feel free, raise your hand. We'll call on you. Attack one of these questions or hit us with a new one. But let's just get right into it. I'm making sure all of my appropriate windows are visible. No, can't be this shy. Okay, here's the first one in the chat. I may be off base when I think of access services. Like when I think of access services, librarianship is not the first thing I think of. Thank you. I think that's a great place to start this conversation. And one of the places I found myself when I first started working at the libraries, that disconnect between access services professionals, those working our scholar support desks in our collections access departments. Here at FSU, we have a library express delivery service who, for the most part, occupy staff roles. And the capital L librarians, often faculty members, who have subject liaison duties, digital humanities, digital scholarship, working directly with faculty member and grad students to get the resources they need to do their research. But the longer I worked in libraries, the more fabricated I found that divide to be between what I was doing in my access services department and what the mission, vision, and goal of an academic library truly is. And I think this document, the framework for access services librarianship, is the place where we as access services professionals can advocate on our behalf that no, what we do is central to the intellectual craft of librarianship, and our job titles, salaries, organization, and distributions of labor should reflect that. That's my personal perspective. Josh, have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Sorry, I unmuted, right? I'm here. I was just thinking about this. I think that this has been kind of many years ago, one of our colleagues who was presenting described access services as the redheaded stepchild of libraries, which has always kind of resonated in me and sort of my professional space. I think, and I saw someone in the chat raise the question about, are we talking about access services librarians or access services library workers generally? And I tend to sort of approach this from a space of we are all professionals. And when I started in this work 20 years ago, I performed a lot of rote work that was highly routinized and could be described as more clerical in nature. That is not our reality anymore. As some of us do, we certainly have a core base of that work, but we oversee students doing a lot of that work now. So now we are managers, we design processes, we oversee quality, we need to engage in technology that, we are here. And I think that we continue though to be seen as kind of this, I don't know, sort of this like clerical operation of the library that's just not respectful to the work that we do and the way that it has changed drastically in the past, 10, 20 years. So I just wanted to, I don't know where that fits in. I think in terms of the craft of librarianship though, like our teams, whether they have a library degree or not, get incredible training and experiences that informs their ability to behave as professionals regardless of that educational credential. I'm stepping down off my soapbox.
Josh, thank you. Leslie.
Yes, sorry about that. I have a response to the initial question that said, when I think of access services, I don't exactly think of librarianship. The response goes that my MLS was concentrated on information services policy and management. And what you find often is that there is one librarian within the department, yet the entire department or division is responsible sometimes solely for the composition and development of most library policy operations and procedures. So, I mean, that is fundamentally librarianship, is what I think the point is trying to get to.
Couldn't agree more, Leslie. Shelley.
Josh and Leslie, thank you for your comments. I agree with both of you. I think that access services still is the redheaded stepchild, no matter how we try and change that. And Leslie, I think you're right. We do a lot of stuff that simply because in access services, they may not have that label of librarian, the people that work there are seen as less, even though they do a lot of the same thing. So it's kind of a, in my mind, it's kind of a holdover from higher education, and that degree being the end all be all that people still see. And they don't realize how much work the people in access services do. You know, like right now at my library, we're tons of changes. Most of those changes are landing on access services. And it's like, sure, we'll take on more, why not? And so it's kind of interesting, the dynamic between the units within a library and between the people within the library.
Shelley, thank you. Andrew.
Yes. So I think one terminological issue that's always struck me, and I've been in access services for a couple of decades now, has been I understand the root basis of it, but the idea that those who are not librarians by title are paraprofessionals, as in somehow less than professional. And I think there's some issue there where it's the terminology professional as in a credentialed individual and professional as in providing professional services in a professional manner in a professional workplace. And for better or worse, and I would probably say for worse, we don't have a linguistic distinction between the two in the way that these terms are used. So I mean, I have always chafed a little bit at the idea that those who are not librarians, capital L, are somehow not professionals simply because they do not have a credential, especially when a number of libraries, primarily outside of academia, but you can be a librarian without that credential. And we are starting to much more, as a profession, we are starting to much more post positions that maybe have an advanced degree in another subject area, not librarianship. And yet they are still being called professionals. They are still being called librarians. And we're trying not to gatekeep as much as possible there. But at the same time, I think the terminology is perhaps one of the things that we should be exploring, and how to express the terminological differences there.
Andrew, thank you for that. Andrew and I have had, and other folks in the ACIG, we've had a lot of conversations about that phrase paraprofessional. And you know, I like to use the phrase information professional. Everyone in my department, if you're faculty, if you're full-time, if you're part-time staff, you're an information professional. That's the field that you're doing work in. And you know, sometimes say, well, they might not see themselves that way. Well, then it's our job as leaders in our library to help them see themselves that way, help administrators see themselves that way, and advocate on their behalf. Andy.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Toulos. I'm at the News School. I've been there for about 10 years as a director of access and user services. Before that, I was at New York Public Library. I was at Stony Brook University. I was at Queens College. So I've done this for quite some time. I see the issue that what's going on with a lot of this is, yes, this stuff is happening at libraries, but why is it happening in our department? So as all these other things are happening, you don't see the growth happening in terms of your cataloging librarians aren't going to take the stuff on. Your reference librarians or instructional librarians aren't going to take this on. So all the new growth seems to happen in access. But instead of developing roles and job descriptions for these things, we just kind of classify soft skills and accept that it's happening in our departments. So I think a way to get out of this is to start developing these jobs that are happening inside of specific jobs that have to get done. So as the director of access, I have an assistant director who does my resource sharing. I have an assistant director who does my stacks and maintenance. I have an assistant director who does all of my managing of my 80 students and my clerical workers. I have 9 clerks underneath them as well. This has to, you have to come up with a hierarchy of showing that it's real work. All my ADs have Masters of Library Science degrees. I have a Master's of Science Library degree and another master's degree. So we've taken it to a level of, this is the material that has to happen. We do reports, we have statistical things that we fill out all the time. And whenever we have a service that has to get done, the question is to my assistant provost, what are you going to give up to have us do this? This is the money that we have. This is the stats that we have. How do you want to figure this? Or you want these hours? I don't, this is what we're showing the hours are right now. It's more advisable that we spend our money in a different way. So instead of catching everything, what I see in a lot of access departments and trying to figure out after you've accepted to do it, how are you going to do it? You need to figure out how you're going to do it first. Figure out who's going to do it and how that funding is going to come. That's how your other departments work. I think we have to start working like that as a group. Start sharing statistics, start sharing strategies, start sharing accepted roles. If you're going to take somebody to run all your technology, why don't they have a technology degree, right? If you're going to take somebody to run, your resource sharing, that should be a librarian type position. You're working with borrowing through hundreds of different universities throughout the country. I was speaking with a woman in a community that I run through Palsy, and at that point on her desk, she was bookbinding, doing a resource loan, working with 10 different student schedules, doing it all together at the same time on her desk. And I'm sure, above her, it's just thought of as, well, that's just access work. I think we make it too easy to say that. We say this is a specific job, it needs a specific manager, and this manager needs a specific education to be successful at this position. I'd love to see this group start putting, like in the access document, which has been a catch-all for everything that's happening, not a sort of like competency, but what does a job description look like to manage this role? That's where I think we have to go that level, not training all of us to do it, but training us to write the jobs to hire people to do it. All right.
Absolutely, Andy. I could not agree more. I could not agree more. Orla.
Yeah, I think, Andy, I've heard you speak on this, and it really does ring true in so many different ways. And I think that over the years, just the nature of what happens in a library has changed significantly. The technologies, the interoperabilities, as well as the different services and how they're provided too. And yes, a lot of it has become job creep when it comes to access services. But, and Andy, I know that you didn't do this on purpose, but it's one of those things that's sort of like nails on a chalkboard to me, and I hear it all too often, are the words just staff. And nothing annoys me more, because I came from corporate over 20 years ago into academia, and it's the only area where only one certain part of the organization was considered professional, and the rest were either just staff or more recently paraprofessional, where everybody has something to bring to the table. And that to me just screams the necessity of a paradigm shift. We need to change the way that our people are viewed. We've already changed our hiring processes because we need to have people with different skills in these positions. So the paradigm shift has to take place. And I think just by virtue of what Andy was saying is that we come together and we shine light on these things and we collaborate and we try to start moving in that direction is really important.
Orla, thank you. Yeah, I think you know what we're all really talking about are those last two questions that we're interested in. The connection between advocacy and defining access services clearly within the intellectual craft of librarianship. I think to Andy's point, clearly defining what an access services librarian is and does, and what access services information professionals are and do, is an excellent way to fight off that job creep and to make more obvious the very important institutional contributions that we're making. I always tell the crew in my department, like, the president of FSU has this big research mandate, wants to see there a more direct connection between FSU and research and scholarly output. And access services staff make that impact every single day. Without the essential services we offer, research and scholarship is not going to be happening as efficiently and effectively as it is on campus. We help the larger institution meet that big goal, and we need to see ourselves that way. Rebecca.
Hi, I love this conversation, first off. One thing I'm hoping to see more of is conversations around like how people join access services and how they get these jobs. So I've recently hired 3 library technicians, and previously you would see the path of LT1, LT2, LT3. You would see that natural progression, but now I'm hiring people with no previous library experience at all, because I don't think a lot of LT, at least 1 or 2 positions exist anymore, especially in libraries where staff sizes has decreased. Usually, I think those jobs are pulled from access services first. So we often lose our staff. So we have people do more tasks, harder tasks. So you do see those higher level degrees, more experience. So I don't know how to do that. I find with the advocacy component, when I'm trying to have these conversations, usually I'm not even invited to the table to talk about how these job descriptions are written, or who we're looking for as a candidate, or even how, like, even what these people are paid, even just like on that base level. But I would like to see that change in like how people join access services, because it's not traditional, start at 1, 2, and then 3 anymore. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, Rebecca. It really resonates with me. Last year, gave a presentation here at the Open Forum about the connection between the retail service industry and access services, and I think we're seeing more and more people coming from retail into access services departments, and they're using that training from retail and retail management to get these jobs and work in these departments. And there is a direct negative impact that's having on the work that we do, how it's viewed, and how these services are run. And I say that as someone with over a decade of retail management experience themselves. Lorelei.
Yeah, so looking at Aaron Owen's comment we had to phase out our library assistant 1 positions because the HR mandated pay scales. I recently reorged my entire department to get rid of LT1s because it just didn't pay enough. And it also, the work they were doing was so much more than an LT1, the job description. So it was a really easy sell. My dean was really excited about this because every time I drove by Burger King and saw the sign that said starting pay $15, and I knew that my crew were making $15.88, well, I'm not going to keep them. Burger King's a lot easier than my job. And I require a lot more, and there's a lot more emotional labor that goes into my front desk folks. And so it just, yeah, anyway, I don't know what I'm saying, but same, you know, like things have really changed.
Lorelai, we did the same thing here at FSU in the last year. I worked hard to eliminate our lowest entry-level position. Was called a library associate. My department was rife with them. The starting salary at the time was $24,500. Which now in Florida would be illegal because that's lower than our minimum wage. We worked hard to eliminate that job because it was not appropriate for the responsibilities that those staff members were assuming. But, you know, back to thinking about the framework, I think, you know, one thing that we're touching on here is that we can use the framework as a way to have specific job descriptions that when we're in these positions and we're working with university administrators, we can point to the framework and say, look, this is the national standard. This is what we are all agreeing this job should do, what its you know, level of responsibility should be, and salary. And I think that's a way we can turn the framework into an advocacy tool and help get some of that subjectivity about how we're organized out of our institutions and, you know, have some solidarity. Josh.
Yeah, I wanted to go back. I think that prior comment from Lorelai brought back to mind what I was saying earlier about I entered this work like over 2 decades ago, and I started in an entry-level position. And my job was very, like, I shelved a lot of books. I filed a lot of loose leaf releases. I've been in law libraries for 20 years now. That work has shrunk dramatically, and more of it in the past few libraries I've worked at is being assigned to student employees. And I think that my last university, I had to rewrite every single job description because they were all at these levels that I'm like, this in no way reflects the work that these people do on a day-to-day basis. They need to know how to do all of that really basic work, but they don't perform much of it themselves. I think that when we think about the amount of time that it takes for us to train a staff member, whether it be a full-time professional or a student employee, just do something as basic as staffing our front desk, like that. You know, when you think about the number of hours and the fact that you're given reference librarian or technical services librarian with all of their training and experience cannot step in and fulfill that role adequately because they just don't know all the nitty-gritty of what a front desk is expected to know. I feel like that gets into sort of it's the training and that craft of librarianship. And I threw something in the chat earlier, like, we bring in a lot of our staff without a lot of experience, and our role is to train them up to speed on how to be a library worker. My colleagues who oversee other departments often are bringing in people who are assumed to already know how to do that because of their professional education that they have. And I think that that is also showing that we are doing a larger lift of training to bring people from 0 to 100, not from like 75 to 100.
Excellent point, Josh. In some of the work that we've been doing researching that connection between retail and access services, one of the things that myself and my colleagues, Eleanor Cleveland and James Waters, discovered is that none of the top 10 schools in none of the top 10 MLIS schools have dedicated required coursework on access services. So access services librarians, for the most part, are either getting their service training in retail service industry or on the job being trained by others who also didn't get that experience in library school. And that's one of the weaknesses of connecting us directly to that intellectual craft of librarianship. Andrea.
Hi, I actually want to step back a little bit. I keep hearing people talk about access service librarians as the redheaded stepchild. And I think one of the reasons that happens is because it's so easy to conflate professionals, and I'm not talking about MLS versus non-MLS, I'm talking about roles, with the rest of the staff in access services. I think that it behooves us to define that differentiation as part of this framework, whether it's about managing staff, managing facilities, policy setting, as that's what makes you a librarian, not the MLS, but what work you perform, versus someone who is, and I don't mean to denigrate them, I'm defending them all the time, someone who is just at the desk, someone who is just doing ILL borrowing. And I don't say just, and I shouldn't use the word just because I'm constantly defending my people who do those things. But there is routinized mid-level work that is very different from the work of management. And we do ourselves a disfavor by lumping those things together. I know that's probably not a popular thing to say, but there it is.
I take your point too, because I think folks who don't understand an access services or an access services department, how we're organized, how we do our work, if they don't have personal experience working in them, they assume that the access services librarian, the head of the department, the director of the division, however that's organized, that they are just on the desk, right? We're all information professionals in our department, but our roles are not as easily understood by those outside of our department. Making that easier for our colleagues to understand is another way to advocate for ourselves. Leslie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to take up the point of you and the last person who spoke. We went round and round about what language should we use. And I think that we landed somewhere around professionals when we had this discussion. Correct me if I'm wrong, compatriots. I believe in what you're saying to be true. It makes perfect sense. The management of whether it is a project, an ongoing assignment, is completely different than what you get from most entry-level and student workers. We don't have to use the language that was given to us by the profession or academia or the institution, what have you. We can design our own that is befitting what it is that we do, because it tends to be rather unique in the environments, in the settings that we are in. And that's what we want your help. We would like your help with in determining. But yeah, I think we came up with something like professional, because the work is professional work. And no, not everyone in any department is routinely engaged in it or responsible for it.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, Leslie's alluding to conversations we've had about uniforming the language within the framework itself. And we understand the nuance that the work professional has when it comes to HR departments and how people are paid and how you're defined. But for the purposes of that document, information professional, that's the phrase that we landed on, that we wanted to use to describe all of the people doing labor in these departments. No matter if you're part-time or if you're full-time or you're a faculty librarian or you're a director of a department, you're all information professionals, you're all doing that work. And using that phrase alongside the phrase access services, I think, is incredibly important. I saw a question in the chat that I thought was interesting. Someone's at a university that does not consider supervising student workers as actual supervisory duties. They're wondering if that's true anywhere else. I can say here at FSU libraries, that's not true. All of my staff that supervise part-time staff, that they're supervisors as a full-time job. Supervising. I should also note here at FSU libraries, we don't call them student workers. kind of has the same effect of calling them student athletes. It's a really great way to make yourself feel better about not giving them paid sick leave or vacation or retirement contributions or tuition waivers. It's important that I feel that administrators understand that as part-time work. Yeah, our part-time staff members, there's a very unique set of challenges that come with managing them and running those schedules and keeping those desks staffed. Very different than managing full-time staff, but just as challenging. Andrew.
Yeah, so I think also that, I mean, we probably all experience this, or at least I expect a lot of us do, where there's the what we call ourselves, or what we call our coworkers, or if you're talking to a part-time staff or student employee, depending on terminology there, you tell them to speak to your supervisor. That means generally the staff person who is on shift when they are working. However, there's the difference between that and then the HR classification of their title as supervisor, etc., which is what determines things like salary, benefits, and opportunities for development and growth. And I think that is one area where we have had discussions as well. I know about opportunities for professional development and the difference in expectations for staff and librarians being sort of a chicken or egg situation. But so I guess I'm wondering, in what way could we use the framework here, whether it's creating training or advocacy, or honestly recruiting people using that as a guideline or a perk, to promote and push for more opportunities for professional development for those who are not considered quote unquote librarians, while at the same time making sure that access services librarians don't fall into the, well, you can't go to this conference because you have to be there when the library is open and it's a lot of money. So those of you who are liaisons for a few departments can maybe go, but those who are in functional areas, as they say, are perhaps more restricted.
Andrew, thank you for that. And as you were speaking, Teresa put a comment in the chat I thought was pretty poignant. At our university, we can't use manage in our LSS position descriptions. That is restricted to MPPs. We can use oversee, guide the work, etc. They did something very similar here at FSU Central. HR did. We used to be able to use the word manager, and a lot of our roles, that phrase has been changed to coordinator. And the thing I'd say here is, if they're paying so much attention to language and how it's used, then we should be too. Leslie.
Yes, I just wanted to add that with the responsibility of supervision, regardless of what you call it, it is something that goes on your resume and or your CV. It is something that you can describe to your next employer. That's the value of it. Most people that are looking for someone with supervisory experience or skill sets, they don't care who you supervised. They want to know what task you supervised them in, how you supervised them, whether or not you were responsible for things like time entering, making sure that was accurate, making sure it was done on time. Those are the things that get you to the next level of supervision / management.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. Andy.
Okay, so with all that we've said today, so the one thing that sticks in my head is create a national standard. How do we measure our work so that any kind of career type profession, you should be able to move around from place to place to place with not the granular events, but the higher level type ideas. How do you move that around? And so what I haven't seen is a way that we've been able to talk about what we do in any form of measured statistics or I don't know, a controlled vocabulary for us, for access services, because I think the jobs have gotten so granular. So I'm wondering if this group would be able to do something like that at a national level.
Andy, thank you for hitting us with that. And in the work that I've been doing with the AC group and thinking about the framework and revisions, hosting these discussions, that's something I'm personally very interested in. Developing sections of the framework that have standardized vocabulary and that have template job descriptions and template org charts. How should you organize your access services department? What are those primary roles and functions? And how does that distribution of labor work? And I think that's something that our other colleagues around our institutions benefit from. Their jobs are clearly defined across the entire profession. And there's expectations when they go from one institution to another, what that role will look like, what part of the library it will be in, and what services they'll oversee. The same is not true for access services. And I think this framework is a way that we can do that. And so when you're sitting across that table negotiating your salary, or you're needing more staff to do a thing, you can slide this across the desk to your dean and say, this is the national standard. This is how these departments are organized. These are how these job titles are written. And this is the level of responsibility we have. And that can be very powerful. Felicity.
Thanks. So a lot of this is really interesting. Just some thoughts, but not necessarily as organized as I would like. So we talk about management and supervision, and specifically, I can say for us, student supervision is pulled apart from supervision of full-time staff because of the unionization of our staff. So there are some implications there. But I think when we talk about management, it's important to think about the fact that management is not just supervising people. It can also be project management. It can be facilities management. Like, there are a lot of ways that we can sort of talk about this. And oftentimes my experience has been that administration will appreciate when they see a problem get solved in real time that they really saw, but often they have no real sense of the cost of those things. So they don't know how long these things take. They don't know how much, social capital it can take to get facilities to work with you on a thing, or, how much wear and tear it takes on your staff to have to talk to users about, yeah, that's still broken and it's a problem. I will say one of the things that we've run into is managers here have recognized that while the outcomes that some of our staff are responsible for getting in the work that they do, those outcomes haven't changed, but what it takes to accomplish those things has changed a lot, has gotten a lot more complicated. The technology's changed. The environment's just a lot more difficult to navigate. And so we've been working with HR in sort of a slow process to understand how we can upgrade those jobs when we can, but it is not a uniform process. It's really difficult. It takes an incredible amount of sweat equity to make that stuff happen. I will say too, like, we've had a lot of issues with HR, especially since the pandemic, where, we've really had it said to us over and over again, we really want to see a diversification of our hiring pools. And the one thing that my managers and I have really understood from doing all the research and living through this is you need to have an expeditious hiring process with your HR, and our HR processes are all lumped together. So everybody's in the same pool, which really slows it down. And the problem with that is, great candidates get away from you. And then on the other end of it, when we have great people that have been working with us who are like, I got a better offer some other place, or I'm moving up, we have absolutely no power to try and do anything to keep them. We don't have any say over the money. We can't, negotiate with them. Some of that is like union related, but a lot of it's not. So, one of the things that we've done is we've just said, okay, we don't have enough bodies to do the things, so we're shutting this down. And we've stopped doing certain areas of work, and we're pretty selective about the things that we do to try and make sure that they will be the things that get noticed.
Felicity, all great points. Letting stuff fail is huge, I think, for access services professionals. Yeah, we can offer that new service point, but now we're going to close the desk at midnight. That's the trade-off. Rebecca.
Hi. So on like the topic of like outcomes and like I love the point of like the conversations that we're having with HR, especially around staffing. And even when I can show them data about why these jobs are important and who we're serving, I feel like there's like still a disconnect. So one thing I've been looking at is when I go into these conversations, the type of data that I want to bring to them. Traditionally, like our data is circulation statistics, which I realize is not super exciting to a lot of people. But one thing I've been researching is I've been learning about like this experience impact compass. So talking about our statistics in the term of impact. So when we're looking at a service that we might have to shut down, like you mentioned previously, rather than saying like we served this many people, talking about it in the framework of this is the impact this service has on this campus, in addition to this is how many people it's helping. And I have found that kind of changing the statistics that I'm actually bringing to HR, sometimes that's been more helpful. But traditionally, like in most traditional settings, people are still just asking for the circulation statistics and how many people walked through the front door, how many questions were asked at the front desk, which can make these conversations even more frustrating when we're trying to talk about why our job is important and who we're serving and why we do what we do, right?
Rebecca, that's a great point. And, you know, one of the things that I like to say in my department here at FSU libraries, especially when I'm in the room with administrators, senior leadership, among all of the traditional understood services that Access Services provides, among them, I list our part-time employment program. We don't use the phrase student worker, but it is true that a lot of our part-time staff are also currently enrolled undergraduate students. And that is a service that we provide to the university, that those students are receiving, you know, that first job experience here in the library and helping make, you know, their higher education that much more affordable. At the same time, if we don't think of it as a service, we take for granted those staff members, the experiences they're having in our institutions, they're still on campus. They're going to go to class and they're going to tell their fellow students, working at the library is terrible. They pay me poorly. They treat me awfully. They give me random tasks that don't make any sense to me, that should probably go to faculty members. They're going to spread that word, and then folks aren't going to like coming to the library. And that staff member themselves is going to feel alienated from the services and resources that they have every right to leverage as a student. And so it's important to think of that. In our department, we say all staff are scholars. You know, we should treat all of the staff in our department as well as we treat all the scholars that come into the building every day. Andrea.
So you'd think I'd be able to unmute after all this time. So one of the things, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I am wondering as I look at the framework, we've seen extensive changes since COVID in the role of access services as more and more library staff work either partially or fully remotely, and the things we take on. And I'm wondering if that's true in other institutions, and if there is a way to have an addendum or a reflection of that in the framework. During the height of the pandemic, we were frequently the only people on site, and I don't see that kind of, and it continues to some extent, and I don't see that reflected here. Just a thought.
I think it's a great point. I think in the conversations I've been having in the last 3 years, COVID-19 definitely seems to be a turning point in the radicalizing of access services professionals. We were all given PPE, we were all given hazard pay, and sent in to stand up, curbside pickup services, while most of our colleagues were at home working remote. And I think the library had to directly express how essential we were to the job, and they were kind of forced to. And I think it showed a lot of us that, and it's hard to ignore. Bailey.
Hi, yes. My name is Bailey. I work at Auraria Library, which is an academic library in Denver, Colorado. And this conversation's been great. So thank you guys for putting this on. It's been really helpful, and I love this framework. I've been reading a lot of what's going on in the chat, and I think it's starting to kind of help me figure out what I want to say here. And during the beginning of this conversation, a few people referred to access services as the red-headed stepchild. And while I completely understand that, I think my perspective is not something that's not wanted or not loved, but an overlooked core service. I think actually as access services, librarians, professional, whatever terminology you want to use, we have a lot of power within the library. We are a very essential service, and we do have so much data to show that. And so for a framework moving forward, I would really love to see us maybe look at a way to use that power and advocacy to come at it and tell a really good story with our data. And I'm not quite sure how to do that yet, but I'm glad people are talking about that. And I think it's a good path forward.
And I am timekeeper. I'm just letting everybody know we've got about 5 minutes left. Keep the conversation going, but I just do want to make that point.
Bailey, I think it's very true that access services professionals should better appreciate the power that they have in their institutions. And I think sometimes the way that we're organized, the way our jobs are defined, and the way that we are paid is to discourage us from appreciating that power.
And Nadine, you have your hand raised.
Oh, I didn't see that, Nadine. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. So as time has passed, we've talked, several people have been in this type of a position for a few decades now. And the way we did things 20 years ago is very different now. We have much more complicated reserve systems where people are having to stream videos and deal with the copyrights and all of that sort of thing. Before, it was just take the book, scan it, and put it on the shelf, put a sticker on it, and you were done. Same thing with checking out study rooms. Now we have to build a website in order to have a reservation system instead of just handing a key out to people. And so many other things that we're doing. We are now circulating equipment, and we have to figure out if all of the components to that camera is there. And if it's not working, then we have to stand and help them do all of that. It's not just sitting at the desk. So few of our staff just check a book in and check a book out anymore. They are folks with many hats and many expertise. And it would be nice to have some language to be able to put into those job descriptions. I just took a job description for someone who was a helper for my stacks manager, and we were trying to hire them to manage our AV equipment pool. They work very closely with faculty and students to find the right equipment for the right jobs. That's a heavy lift. They didn't see, HR didn't see, it's just a library clerk's job. So it wasn't raised in a band, it wasn't given more pay, nothing. And so it would be really, I think it would be very beneficial to have some common threads on all of this.
Absolutely, Nadine. I think if an access services department is running well, A lot of the labor is intentionally hidden. The scholars that walk into the library, we don't want them to see all those nuts and bolts. We want them to request their thing, get their thing, and be able to leave. Unfortunately, that's also how most of the library administrators will experience the work done in our departments. They're not in our staff meetings. They're not learning ALMA. They're not understanding how our booking calendar works. They have the same experience as every student that walks in. And I think this framework is a very important place to surface that invisible labor and complexity inherent in these jobs. Here at FSU Libraries, we just installed 2 sets of outdoor remote lockers. That's an incredibly sophisticated interface and new service. That's 5 different software platforms to learn, and how are you going to code it in the catalog? Who's going to have access? All that stuff goes into making a seamless service experience. I want the students and scholars we serve every day to have that seamless experience. I don't want my dean to have that. And Dean Gail Edgemeier, if you're watching this later, you're an awesome dean. Thank you.
And we do just have 1 minute left, Jeff.
Y'all, thank you so much for today's conversation. You've given us a lot to think about as we keep interrogating the framework and discovering new ways that we can make it work better for all of us. And that's the goal, to better define access services, its role in the craft of librarianship, and help our colleagues, university administrators, see that complexity as well. I'm sure there's going to be more of these events from the ASIG moving forward, more ways for you to participate and help us through this revision process. Thank you again for everyone who came. Thanks for my fellow co-conveners, Lorelei, Tori, H, Andrew, Leslie, for helping put this on and keep us organized. This is really exciting work and they're really exciting conversations. Thank you everyone for being here today.
And thank you, Jeff and Andrew. You did a great job. Really excited. This was great.
I got to talk a lot. It's like my